know what kind of word you would use to describe 2022, or maybe just in general, the world we live in. Maybe you could pick a word in your mind. Try and keep it church appropriate, if possible. It may not be. It's been an interesting time. I think one of the words that we would use to describe this time in the world would be complex. Just really complex. Which is interesting because you would think with all of our innovation and access to information that things would become much more simple. So we're going to be in this series these next 3 weeks. I'm going to be teaching on this idea of simplicity. I want to just say from the beginning, some of you are already uncomfortable because I said more simple. Look, let's just clear this up. Simpler, more simple are both grammatically acceptable. Don't Google it. I'm not lying to you. Simpler is technically accurate. If it's a 2-syllable word, you can add ER to it. But more simple is also okay. So I'm going to tell you that up front because I don't want to hear from any of you for the next 3 weeks about me saying simpler instead of more simple. If that's what gets you upset, it's going to be a long 2023 for you, right? Like there are other things to get worked up about than some grammar. Although I care about these things too. That's why I'm explaining it and spending entirely too much time in the introduction of my sermon. Creating complexity while talking about simplicity is really what I'm doing, right? So we would think things would be simpler, but they feel more complex. In fact, things that promise to make our life more simple will often create unexpected challenges, often create some kind of complexity. Last night, I was getting ready to go to bed, shot a text to my son, 18, telling him, hey, make sure you don't stay out too late tonight. And the text said, hey, buddy, don't stay out too late tonight. Before I went to bed. And after I sent it, I realized I didn't actually send it to him. But I had sent it to the person that I had most recently texted, who some of you know, Brooke Brotzman. He leads Go Ministries, has been doing that for years and years, one of our ministry partners. I had recently texted him a Happy New Year and had somehow accidentally texted him saying, hey buddy, don't stay out too late tonight. And I told my wife what I did. We were laying in bed kind of laughing about it. And she's like, well, you need to tell him that it wasn't meant for him. That was meant to Kale, my son. And I'm like, I don't think I need to tell him. Like, that's good advice, right? Like, if I, as your pastor, texted you and said, don't stay out too late tonight, you'd be like, okay, that seems fair. Like, so I didn't mention it. He's finding out about it now with you, that wasn't meant for him. Some things we think will make our lives more simple can complicate things, create different tangled messes. I think we see that when it comes to, navigating romantic relationships. Dating world has become more and more complex, even though we have all these tools that you think would make it easier. Or preparing your taxes has become more and more difficult, more and more complex. And so our tendency is often towards complexity. In fact, in psychology, we'll talk about it more next week, there's what's called the complexity bias. The idea is that we are naturally drawn to complex solutions for what we perceive to be complex problems. If we look around and recognize, oh, this is a mess, the way to get out of that mess just feels like it should be complex as well. There's something about complexity that we're drawn to because it gives us an illusion of control. We think, okay, well, if I do these things, I can control this situation, I can fix it. It's not gonna be simple, it's hard to understand, but at least I'll be able to control it. And so we tend to be drawn towards complexity. I think you see this time of year when people are making different health resolutions. This idea of regular exercise with caloric restriction, it's pretty simple, but there's something about a 300-page book on some new diet that we're drawn to. We tend to like complexity. And I think that's probably true for us when we analyze 2022. We look ahead to 2023 and we're focusing on what areas in my life do I need to change? Where do I need to grow? Like, it's good and right to have some times of the year where we think about those things. And so we naturally do that on January 1st. And I would just say that we tend to be drawn to new ideas, new information, and complex solutions. If you Google self-improvement, you'll get about 1.1 billion hits because that's what they limit you to. They don't even give you more options, but there's all kinds of self-improvement options. Same true if you go to the bookstore, look under the self-help section. A friend of mine who reads a lot of self-help said, I've come to the conclusion that self doesn't help self very well. And I think a lot of us would agree with that. Like, the more self has tried to help self, the more help self seems to need. It just doesn't seem to work, and yet we think, well, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's some new information that they've discovered. Maybe there's some new kind of medication that would solve this problem. And so we just have this tendency towards complexity. And so what we're gonna do in these 3 weeks, we're gonna look at just simple words of Jesus. Simple, I didn't say easy. Simple and easy, if you check it, are synonyms, but they're not the same thing. Right, I think we can all agree that there are some things that are simple, but they're not easy. I wrote down a few examples of some things that have been told to me in the last week, which I felt like qualified as, well, it sounds simple, but it's not that easy. Pick whichever line is the shortest. Okay, well, that sounds simple, but that is not easy. I can't do it. I am not capable of doing it. It sounds so simple when you say it. Put your phone down. Well, I can't do that right now. It sounds simple, but you don't know what I'm doing on my phone. Simple, but it's not easy. Just admit that you were wrong. Okay, you first, right? Like, that sounds simple, but it's not easy. Stop snoring. I'm trying. I can't hear it. I don't know I'm doing it. I don't know how to turn it off. It sounds simple. It's not easy. It's only a ping pong game. Don't be so upset. Sounds simple, but it's not easy. And there are a lot of things like this. And I think it's true of some of what we read in the Gospels, some of the teaching of Jesus. Some of it seems simple, but it's not necessarily easy. And so what we're gonna do is study some examples of that these next 3 weeks. First, if you would turn to Matthew chapter 7, if you have your Bible, open to Matthew 7, first book of the New Testament, Gospel of Matthew. Or on your phone, you can pop open Matthew chapter 7. This is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. One of the things I'd love to encourage you to do today or this week is to take time to read Matthew 5, 6, 7, and to read the Sermon on the Mount in one setting. But this is the end. We're just gonna look at the conclusion of the sermon that Jesus has been preaching. If you read the sermon, you'll see that what Jesus is doing is giving people a lens through which to look at life, a foundation for them to build their life on. And this is what it looks like to live for the kingdom of heaven. And it's not super complicated. In fact, when he was done with the sermon, he probably got a few emails from people saying, hey, we're gonna go listen to another rabbi. We kind of like deeper teaching. Because what Jesus taught was simple, and he applied it, and then he used some stories to help people unpack it and understand it. And so he ends this sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, with this very simple parable, actually 2 parables, but they're each only a couple sentences long. And so when you see this, what you wanna do is you wanna line these 2 stories up next to each other, lay them out, and you wanna figure out where they're the same and then highlight where they go in different directions. So Matthew 7, verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it didn't fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. Second story, verse 26. But in contrast to the first person, but everyone who hears these words of mine, so what do we see? They both hear the words of Jesus. They're both in church. They're both listening to the sermon. They're both reading out of the same book. They're both in the audience. They've heard the Sermon on the Mount. But the first person put it into practice. Verse 26 says, everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't apply them, doesn't put it into practice, doesn't align their life with them, is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. And so it's not complicated. It's pretty simple. I want to make just a few obvious observations of how these 2 stories connect. One is that everyone builds a house. Both builders build a house. Idea is everyone, all those listening to the words of Jesus, are building a house. And of course, in this story, house is a metaphor for life. Everyone builds a life. Well, whether you want to or not, you're building one. Part of living is building a life. Everyone builds a life. And so how do we do that? How do we build a life? Think of a large brick house, like large. Let's say 5-6 bedrooms, 6,000 square feet. It consists of around 25,000 bricks. So if you have this picture in your mind, think of each brick of that house representing a decision that you make throughout the course of a year. There's a Columbia researcher who said that we, according to her study, that we make 70 decisions every day. 70 decisions a day. Now, a lot of those are subconscious, meaning they're habitual. We did them yesterday, we do them today, we'll do it tomorrow, but still they're decisions. About 70 decisions a day. Do the math on that, about 25,500 bricks a year that make up the house that you've built in the course of a year. Each decision is a brick in the house you're building. So think through some of the bricks from 2022. And some of them are easy to point out, like you recognize that you made a certain decision and maybe it wasn't the best. I mean, at the time you were doing the best you could. If you had it do over again, you would change things. Or maybe you made a great decision and you're really thankful that you had the opportunity to make the decision you did. Or maybe it's a lot of bricks that didn't seem that significant but have added up as 25,000 bricks tend to do, right? Like it's just this daily decision that you're gonna respond with defensiveness and criticism. And each time you do that, you're putting a brick in the house that you live in. Or maybe it's a decision to forgive. And you made that decision, and then you found out that you have to keep making that decision. But each time you decided to forgive and let go of that bitterness, you added another brick to the house. And so every decision we make is a brick that ends up building our lives over time. If you do the math on this, 25,500 bricks a year, by the time you're 80, it's 2 million decisions. That ultimately, your life largely consists of 2 million decisions that you've made, whether you wanted to do it that way or not. That's just how it works out. Gretchen Rubin wrote a book on habits. I really like her language here. She talks about how a lot of these decisions are actually just habits that have accumulated. The invisible architecture of daily life is how she refers to habits. We repeat about 40% of our behavior almost daily, so our habits shape our existence and our future. The invisible architecture of daily life. It's the little things that you do consistently that end up having a pretty determinative effect on the house that you're building, whether you want them to or not. So both builders build a house. A second thing that you see in this story that they have in common is that they both face a storm. Everybody builds a house, and every house will face a storm. That's true for you, it's true for me. Notice that the description in these two stories is identical when it comes to the storm. Both verse 25 and verse 27 says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. So this is gonna be true for you, true for me. If it's not true, it will be, that storms are a part of life. And the Bible makes it clear that this isn't just true for people who don't know Jesus, but it's true for people who know Jesus. The difference is what kind of house they've built, but every house faces a storm. Rain falls on the just and the unjust. And so the passage says that the rain comes. And so the bitterness starts to build up. Your position at work gets eliminated. The candidate you thought was gonna just turn everything around doesn't get elected. The streams rise, like you just can't seem to get ahead of things financially. You take some strides, but then it just starts rising. Your singleness didn't seem like that big of a deal a few years ago, but now it's starting to feel like this constant burden that you carry. The streams rise. Your kids can't seem to turn things around. They just don't get it. And the wind blows, an affair is discovered, cancer is diagnosed, a virus spreads, the economy crashes, and with it, so does your retirement. And this is just life, right? We all face storms. Now, for some of you, 2022, I don't know, light sprinkle. Like there were some things, but not bad. For others of you, a lot of like Category 5 hurricanes. In fact, you've begun to name your hurricanes as a way to keep track of them because there's so many happening at once. And it might just happen that some of the names you've given your hurricanes like correlate with real people in your life, but it's just coincidence. Like you didn't plan it that way. But there's just a lot happening, one thing after another, and it can just feel overwhelming. Every house faces a storm. So that's what happens in Matthew 7. What we discover is that the storm will reveal what a house is made of. Storms reveal the foundation your house is built on. They do. So when suddenly you go through something difficult or hard, if you've been building your life on something other than Jesus, it tends to surface. And some of you could tell that in a very personal way. And maybe you're with someone and they've built their life on something other than the foundation of Jesus, and a storm has come and their house has collapsed, and you happen to be in the house that they built. Or for some of you, you've just discovered that you didn't realize you were building on the wrong foundation until the storm came. I think a lot of people have experienced this in the last few years. You just kind of step back and watch as people just feel overwhelmed with anxiety. It's because oftentimes the house they built isn't standing up to the storms, and they're not sure what to do because they've never really thought about it. They just started building, and now the storm has come and it's exposed that the foundation isn't good. And so the question to wrestle with, I want you to think through as we start this new year, is what foundation are you building your house on? And there's no non-answer to this, right? Like everyone is building a house, and every house has some kind of foundation. I suppose perhaps the most dangerous place to be is unaware. When I ask that question, you're like, well, I don't really know, I guess. Really? Like you don't know the foundation you're building your life on? You don't know the lens you're using to see this world and make decisions? You're just letting that happen? What foundation are you building your house on? It matters. It doesn't matter how impressive the house is if it's not built on the right foundation. And Jesus talks about here the wise builder who built on the rock, which he defines as putting his words into practice, and the foolish builder is the person who listened to his words but didn't align their lives with what he taught. I was reading about a test that was conducted by the Institute for Business and Home Safety in Richburg, South Carolina. And so what researchers did was they built two houses, identical looking houses, each of them 1,300 square feet, and they built them inside of this $40 million environment that they could control. And the first house that they built was built by all the right standards, kind of followed all the building requirements, all the building codes. The second house they built was the same, except they used these reinforcement straps to connect every part of the house to the foundation, including the roof. Every part of the house, they connected it to the foundation. And then they turned on these fans. These aren't just any ordinary fans. These are $40 million fans, right? And they're capable of producing winds of up to 110 miles an hour, or a Category 3 hurricane. And they ran some experiments. In the first experiment, they turned these fans on for 3 minutes, and they came out okay. They had a little cosmetic damage, but they were fine for 3 minutes. Then the next experiment they turned the fans up 110 miles an hour, but this time for 10 minutes. And then they watched what happened. I think we've got a picture here of the difference between the two houses. And so the house that was built fine, I mean, it followed the standards. It did what was accepted. It didn't hold up. Now, it did for 3 minutes, but not 10 minutes. The other house, which was reinforced at every point to the foundation, had some cosmetic damage, but structurally, it was good. So structurally, it was strong. And I think this is probably where some of us are at. Like, we've experienced some storms in life, but they just weren't more than 3 minutes long. And so we did okay. We made it out all right. But then the storm just kept raging, and it went from 3 minutes to 4 minutes. And that suddenly at 9, 10 minutes, things are shaking and you're scared and you're afraid of losing everything that you've built and what you've put your confidence in. And then it just all collapses. One of the researchers, an engineer named Tim Reingold, was trying to explain some of the data, some of the metrics that came from these studies, but it was complicated. And he just said, look, here's the bottom line. The question you have to ask yourself is, which house would you rather be living in? It's motions to the houses behind. Really, the only question is, which of these houses do you want to live in? And this is what Jesus is doing. He's saying, look, there are two ways to live your life. You can build your house upon the foundation of Scripture, on what Jesus says, or you can go your own way. But a storm is coming, and when the storm comes, you just need to decide which of these houses do you want to be living in. And he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And he is defining for us here, in part, a biblical worldview. That you're going to take the teachings of Jesus, and you're going to use those teachings as a lens through which you're going to see the world and make your decisions. It's not going to be based on what other people are saying. It's not going to be based on what is culturally popular. Like, that's not it. It's going to be the words of Jesus.